A peaceful mansion in Brentwood, a beloved Hollywood director, a family torn apart. What started as a heartbreaking tragedy quickly transformed into something nobody saw coming. Because when federal agents stepped through those mansion doors, they weren't just investigating a family incident. They were uncovering secrets that could shake the foundations of both Hollywood and Washington. The name Rob Reiner brings back memories for millions. The kid from All in the Family who grew up to direct some of cinema's most beloved films. Stand By Me, The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men. His career wasn't just successful, it was legendary. But behind the cameras and the red carpets, Rob was building something else entirely. A network of connections that reached far beyond the entertainment industry. Rob didn't just make movies, he made waves. His political activism wasn't quiet or subtle. He stood front and center, championing causes, supporting campaigns, and rubbing shoulders with some of the most powerful people in America. To the public, he was a passionate voice for change. But to those paying closer attention, he was becoming something more. A man with access. A man with information. A man who knew things. And that's where our story really begins. January 2026. The streets of Brentwood were quiet that afternoon. This wasn't just any neighborhood. This was where privacy came with a price tag, where tall hedges protected more than just property lines. Behind one of those hedges sat the Reiner family mansion, a stunning estate that had been home to Rob, his wife Michelle, and their children for over 30 years. The house itself told a story. Built in the 1930s with classic New England architecture, it sprawled across nearly 10,000 square feet, 6 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, a pool that sparkled under the California sun, gardens that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Everything about it screamed elegance and success. But on that particular afternoon, the mansion's beauty couldn't hide what was happening inside. Romy Reiner had decided to visit her parents. Just a regular check-in, the kind of thing families do. She pulled up to the familiar driveway, walked through the front door, and stepped into a nightmare she would never forget. Her parents, Rob and Michelle, weren't responding. They weren't moving. The home that had always been filled with warmth and laughter had gone completely silent. Her hands shaking, Romy dialed 911, her voice breaking as she tried to explain what she was seeing. Minutes felt like hours as emergency vehicles rushed to the scene. Paramedics, police officers, and investigators. Everyone arrived hoping they could help. But it was already too late. Rob Reiner was found near the living room. Michelle was discovered in the kitchen, close to where she had been preparing what should have been another family meal. The scene told a story of violence, of struggle, of something that had happened fast and without warning. Both were rushed to the coroner's office, where specialists confirmed the worst: severe internal trauma, injuries that pointed to an attack so sudden, so overwhelming, that neither had time to call for help. The neighborhood that prided itself on safety and seclusion was now swarming with police tape and flashing lights. Neighbors peeked through curtains, whispering questions nobody could answer. How could this happen here? Who would do this? And most importantly, why? Then came the twist nobody expected. Hours after the discovery, police took Nick Reiner into custody. Rob and Michelle's son. The same Nick who had recently returned home after completing a rehabilitation program. The same Nick who had spent years battling addiction, homelessness, and personal demons. Now he was being led away in handcuffs, his face a mixture of shock and confusion. To the outside world, it looked like the case was solved. Troubled son returns home. Family tensions explode. Tragedy follows. Simple. Clean. The kind of story the media loves to tell because it makes sense. But nothing about this case was simple. And it definitely wasn't clean. Because just when everyone thought they understood what happened, the FBI showed up. Federal agents don't just appear at local crime scenes for no reason. Their presence meant something bigger was at play. Something that went beyond family drama. Something that required resources, expertise, and security clearance that local police simply didn't have. The moment those unmarked vehicles rolled up to the Brentwood mansion, the entire investigation changed. Leading the federal team was Special Agent Nathaniel Cross, 20 years of experience. Sharp instincts, the kind of investigator who sees patterns where others see chaos. Cross had worked everything from organized crime to political corruption, but even he could feel something unusual about this case. The air itself felt heavy with secrets. Cross moved through the mansion methodically, every room, every corner, every detail examined with precision. His team installed surveillance equipment, trace detection gear, and secured the entire property. This wasn't just a crime scene anymore. It was a vault, and they were about to discover just how deep that vault went. Among the officers assisting that day was a young LAPD member named Daniel Hayes. Fresh face, eager eyes, only 2 years on the job. Most rookies would have stayed in the background, following orders and taking notes. But Daniel had something special. Instinct, the kind that makes good cops great. He was walking through a dim hallway near the library when something caught his eye. A tiny reflection. Just a glimmer of light hitting something that didn't quite fit. Most people would have walked right past it. But Daniel stopped. He leaned closer. And that's when he saw it. A wooden panel that looked like part of the wall, but wasn't quite flush with the rest. "Sergeant, I think I found something." Cross approached immediately. Together they examined the panel, running their hands along its edges until they found the mechanism, a hidden latch. When they pushed it open, revealing a concealed door, the entire room went silent. Even experienced investigators knew they were looking at something significant. Behind that door was a staircase leading down into darkness, the kind of darkness that holds secrets. As they descended, flashlights cutting through the shadows, they entered a basement room that nobody outside the Reiner family knew existed. And what they found inside would change everything. Steel cabinets lined the walls, not the kind you buy at a furniture store. These were professional grade, locked, secured, the kind used to protect classified materials. Inside those cabinets were documents, recordings, encrypted drives, and files marked with official seals, government seals, political seals, the kind of paperwork that shouldn't exist in someone's private home. "Agent Cross, look at this." Daniel's voice was barely a whisper as he flipped through folder after folder. Names jumped off the pages, powerful names, political figures, policy drafts that were never made public, communications that were meant to stay private, memos stamped with classifications that made even federal agents pause. This wasn't just research. This was a collection of information that could destabilize institutions if it ever saw daylight. But why did Rob have all this? Was he protecting it? Was he investigating something? Or had he stumbled onto information that made him a target? The room felt like stepping into a spy thriller. Maps covered in markings, audio equipment, surveillance devices, photographs with mysterious symbols. It looked like Rob had been running his own private investigation. Or maybe he'd been trying to protect himself from something he knew was coming. Then Daniel spotted something in the corner. An old wooden desk, simple, worn. On it sat a typewriter, stacks of handwritten notes, and a leather-bound notebook that looked like it had been touched 1,000 times. Carefully, Daniel picked it up. The leather was soft with age. The pages smelled of time and emotion. This wasn't a government file. This was personal. This was Rob's diary. Daniel's hands trembled as he opened to the first page. The handwriting was shaky but readable, and the words hit him like a punch to the chest. It was addressed to Nick, not as a formal letter, but as a father speaking to his son. Raw, honest, painful. "Nick, I know you're struggling. I just want you to know I'm always here. No matter how lost you become, I will never leave you." The entries went on, page after page of a father watching his son fight demons he couldn't defeat for him. Rob described sleepless nights sitting outside Nick's room, prayers whispered in the dark, hope that refused to die even when everything else seemed to be falling apart. Every word dripped with love. The kind of love that doesn't quit. The kind that hurts because it cares so deeply. "I only hope you understand that my love will never change, no matter what mistakes you make." Daniel could barely see through the tears forming in his eyes. He'd read hundreds of case files, thousands of reports. But this was different. This wasn't evidence. This was a human heart laid bare on paper, a father's confession to a son who might never read it. As he continued reading, the entries became more desperate, more afraid. Rob wrote about pressures he was facing, people asking questions, demands being made, meetings that left him terrified. And through it all, his biggest fear wasn't for himself. It was for his children, especially Nick. Then came the final entry, the one that made everything else fall into place. The one that left Daniel frozen in complete shock. "Nick, you are not my biological son. I know this truth could change everything, but I love you as my own. No one will ever care for you like I do." The room went silent. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The secret that Rob had carried for decades. The truth he'd protected with everything he had. It wasn't about politics or power. It was about family. About a father who loved his son so completely that biology didn't matter. Blood didn't matter. Only love mattered. But there was more. The final words on that page sent chills down Daniel's spine. "There are people who won't let me live if I reveal everything. Dad is sorry, Nick. Please be careful. This wasn't just a diary entry. It was a warning, a goodbye." Rob knew something was coming. He knew his life was in danger. And in those final moments, his only thought was protecting his son. Daniel carefully placed the diary into an evidence bag, his hands still shaking. He looked at Agent Cross, who had been reading over his shoulder. Both men understood. This case wasn't what it appeared to be, not even close. The investigation exploded from there. Every cabinet was opened, every file examined, every recording analyzed. What they discovered painted a disturbing picture. Rob hadn't just collected this information randomly. He'd been targeted, watched, followed. Forensic teams found something even more chilling: traces of rare chemical compounds in the food and water inside the mansion. Substances so subtle that only advanced lab equipment could detect them. Rob and Michelle had been poisoned. Slowly, carefully. The kind of poisoning designed to weaken them before the final attack, to make sure they couldn't fight back, couldn't call for help, couldn't escape. Then came the surveillance devices, hidden in trees outside the mansion, camouflaged in flower beds, tucked into garden lights, professional-grade equipment, the kind intelligence agencies use. Someone had been watching the Reiner family for weeks, maybe months, recording their conversations, tracking their movements, waiting for the perfect moment. The security system that should have triggered during any break-in never activated. Whoever did this knew the codes, knew the layout, knew exactly when and how to strike. This wasn't a family dispute that got out of hand. This was planned, calculated, professional. Agent Cross assembled his team and laid out the evidence. The classified documents, the surveillance equipment, the diary entries, the poisoning, all of it pointed to one terrifying conclusion. Rob Reiner had information that powerful people wanted buried, and they were willing to do anything to silence him. But what about Nick? Where did he fit into all this? The public had already made up their minds. The media painted him as a troubled son with a history of addiction and anger, someone who snapped under pressure, someone who couldn't handle the truth about his adoption. The narrative was simple, too simple. Investigators started digging deeper into Nick's background. Yes, he'd struggled with addiction. Yes, he'd been to rehab multiple times. Yes, his relationship with his parents had been complicated. But the Nick they discovered in recent months didn't match the monster the media was creating. People from his treatment center described a man working hard to rebuild his life, attending therapy, staying sober, reconnecting with his faith. His counselors reported genuine progress, real change, the kind of transformation that takes years of difficult work. Was this really someone who would suddenly turn violent? Witnesses from the days leading up to the tragedy told conflicting stories. Some mentioned a heated exchange between Nick and Rob at a Christmas party, tension over something Nick had said or done, but others described Nick as calm, reflective, even optimistic about his future. The FBI began exploring a darker theory. What if Nick wasn't the mastermind? What if he was the fall guy? His troubled past made him the perfect scapegoat, easy to blame, easy to convict in the court of public opinion. And while everyone focused on Nick, the real architects of this tragedy could disappear into the shadows. Think about it. The security system mysteriously fails. Professional surveillance equipment surrounds the property. Chemical compounds that require expertise to obtain and administer. Classified documents that powerful people would kill to protect. Does that sound like something a recovering addict could orchestrate alone? Some investigators whispered about an even more disturbing possibility. What if Nick had been manipulated, used as a weapon by people who knew his vulnerabilities, his desperation to reconnect with his family, his emotional fragility, his need for acceptance? These weren't weaknesses, they were pressure points. and in the wrong hands, they could be exploited. The FBI mapped out every connection. Who had access to the classified materials? Who knew about the hidden basement? Who had the resources to conduct surveillance on that scale? The list was shorter than expected, and every name on it carried serious weight. Agent Cross brought in behavioral analysts to examine Rob's mental state in his final weeks. The diary entries revealed a man under tremendous stress, fear, paranoia, but also clarity. Rob knew exactly what was happening. He wasn't losing his mind. He was documenting the truth in case something happened to him. Meanwhile, the classified files revealed Rob's deep involvement in political fundraising and activism, connections to campaigns, access to sensitive information, private communications with figures who moved in the highest circles of power, the kind of access that comes with responsibility and danger. One file in particular caught everyone's attention. It detailed a series of meetings Rob had attended where demands were made. Pressure applied, threats implied. People wanted Rob to hand over certain documents, to destroy others, to keep his mouth shut about things he'd seen and heard. Rob had refused, and according to his diary, that refusal had marked him as a problem, a liability, someone who knew too much and couldn't be controlled. As word of the FBI's discoveries leaked to the media, public opinion began to shift. Questions that had been ignored suddenly demanded answers. Why did federal agents need to get involved in what looked like a family tragedy? What were those classified documents doing in Rob's basement? Who had been surveilling the Reiner family and why? The case that seemed so simple on that first day had become one of the most complex investigations in Los Angeles history. Every answer led to 3 new questions. Every piece of evidence opened another door. And behind each door lurked possibilities that made even experienced investigators uncomfortable. Nick remained in custody, but his legal team started pushing back hard. They demanded answers about the surveillance, the poisoning, the classified materials. How could their client be responsible for an operation that required resources and expertise far beyond his capabilities? The prosecution's case, which had seemed airtight based on circumstantial evidence and Nick's troubled history, started showing cracks. Big cracks, the kind that make juries hesitate, the kind that make prosecutors nervous. In the court of public opinion, the battle was even more intense. Some people clung to the original narrative: troubled son, family secrets, tragic outcome. Others saw a conspiracy, a cover-up, a powerful establishment protecting its own by sacrificing a vulnerable young man. The truth, as always, probably lay somewhere in the messy middle. But finding that truth meant navigating a maze of political connections, classified information, and family secrets that spanned decades. Through it all, one image haunted everyone involved in the investigation. Rob's final diary entry. A father's love expressed in trembling handwriting. A warning to a son who might have been adopted, but was never less than fully loved. Words written by a man who knew his time was running out, but still hoped his message would somehow reach the child he'd raised as his own. The Brentwood mansion stands empty now. Crime scene tape still flutters in the breeze. The gardens that once hosted family gatherings have gone quiet. The rooms that echoed with laughter now hold only questions. Federal agents continue their work, analyzing files, tracing connections, building a case that could reach into the highest levels of power. Local investigators focus on the immediate crime, the physical evidence, the timeline, the forensics. And somewhere in the middle of all this complexity sits Nick Reiner, a man who lost his parents, his home, his freedom, whether he's a killer or a victim, guilty or innocent, mastermind or pawn. Those answers remain locked behind closed doors and sealed files. What we know for certain is this. Rob Reiner wasn't just a Hollywood director who made beloved films. He was a man who accumulated knowledge that made him dangerous to the wrong people. He was a father who loved his son completely, even when that love was tested by addiction and secrets. And he was someone who saw something coming, something he couldn't stop, but tried desperately to warn others about. Michelle Reiner, often overlooked in the headlines, was more than just Rob's wife. She was his partner in activism, his confidant, someone who shared his burdens and his secrets. Her loss is just as profound, just as mysterious, just as deserving of answers. The classified documents remain under federal protection. Their contents may never be fully disclosed to the public. The surveillance equipment has been traced to sources that investigators won't discuss. The chemical compounds used in the poisoning are being analyzed by experts who understand their implications. And Rob's diary? That leather-bound confession of a father's heart? It sits in an evidence locker, its words preserved but its message echoing far beyond those pages. Love, fear, warning, goodbye. Hollywood has seen its share of scandals, mysteries, tragedies that shock the world before fading into history. But this one feels different. Maybe it's because Rob Reiner represented something beyond celebrity. He was part of our childhoods, our culture. Someone who made us laugh and cry and believe in stories. Or maybe it's because underneath all the politics and power and classified files, there's a human story that we can all understand. A father who loved his son, a family torn apart, secrets that proved too dangerous to keep. The investigation continues. More evidence will emerge. More questions will be answered, and probably more mysteries will surface. Because cases like this don't wrap up neatly with a bow. They unravel slowly, revealing layers that nobody expected. So what really happened in that Brentwood mansion? Was Nick Reiner a troubled son pushed to the edge by family secrets and addiction? Or was he a convenient scapegoat for forces that operated far above his understanding? Did Rob Reiner's activism and political connections make him a target? Were the classified documents the real reason behind this tragedy? We may never know the complete truth. Some secrets die with the people who hold them. Some evidence gets buried under classifications and legal protections. Some witnesses stay silent out of fear or loyalty or self-preservation. But one thing is absolutely clear. This story isn't over, not by a long shot. Federal investigators continue their work. New witnesses come forward. Technology reveals details that were hidden before. And piece by piece, the puzzle starts forming a picture. Maybe not the whole picture, but enough to see shadows, shapes, suggestions of what really happened. If this story gripped you the way it gripped everyone who learned about it, do me a favor, hit that like button. Share this with someone who appreciates real investigations into cases that deserve answers. And subscribe because this isn't the last chapter. As more information comes out, as investigators uncover new evidence, you'll want to be here when we break it down. The Reiner family tragedy represents something deeper than headlines and speculation. It's a reminder that behind every mansion gate, underneath every layer of wealth and fame, real people live real lives filled with love and fear and secrets we'll never fully understand. Rob Reiner spent his career telling stories that made us feel. Stories about friendship and love and standing up for what's right. In the end, his own story became the most compelling and tragic of all. A mystery wrapped in politics. A father's love tested by impossible circumstances. A family destroyed by forces they might not have fully understood. Rest in peace, Rob and Michelle. Your story demands justice, and somewhere in those files and diaries and evidence lockers, the truth is waiting to be found. Whether Nick was responsible, whether powerful people orchestrated a cover-up, whether the secrets Rob protected were worth the price his family paid. The answers are out there, and we won't stop looking until we find them. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one, where we'll dive even deeper into the evidence that federal investigators don't want you to see.